Welcome to our weekly 3-minute therapy podcast. I'm Dr. Michael Edelstein, clinical psychologist. I'm here with my co-host, Rick Berry, and our tech engineer, Chris Rossini. And we base our shows on REBT, Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy, which is a form of therapy which revolutionized the therapy movement in 1950s when Albert Ellis came along and has written, and since then has written over 80 books on the subject. And REBT starts with the first principle, which is that our emotions don't come from situations directly, but they come from our thinking about situations. So humans are cognizing, thinking, appraising individuals. And that's a very powerful concept because if you have emotions like anxiety, depression, anger, or jealousy, then that comes from your thinking. And if you don't like feeling that way, you can change your thinking. And to do that, look for your demands, your musts, shoulds, supposed tos, have tos. I must do well and get approval. Others must treat me well, and my life must go well. That's the foundation for our podcast. Mick, did you want to add anything about that?
No, it sounds good.
Okay, good. And today we're going to be discussing jealousy. We're revisiting jealousy again. And jealousy comes from musts and shoulds. And one of the main types of jealousy is jealous of another person and takes the form of I must be number one in my partner's eyes, past, present, and future. I had a client once who was an adult and was jealous whenever his wife talked about a boyfriend she had had in high school. So once you have those musts, they tend to encompass a lot of situations. Mick, did you want to say anything about that?
Just that in my experience, when somebody is not jealous, they are very attractive. I've been with some women who were jealous of friends of mine or past girlfriends. And it really did, I was not happy to experience them behaving that way. And then I've been in relationships with women who have not minded in the least bit. In fact, encouraged me. I'll stay in touch. You're good friends with that old girlfriend of yours. That's really wonderful. I think you should keep that going. And I'm encouraged to be with you that you can still be friends with her. And these were qualities that made me want to stick with the women who were not jealous and made me uncomfortable with the women who were jealous. So incentive to get over jealousy is that it's a much more attractive feature and it benefits you and other people to not be jealous. The benefits are great, whereas the benefits of jealousy, I think, are pretty minimal. All you can pretty much do is end up being cast as Othello and kill your wife in a play.
Right, right. But in terms of the attractiveness of not being jealous, attractiveness is in the eye of the beholder. And
Well,
I just want to finish this thought, Mick. And some people think that if you're not jealous of a friend, say you're a woman and your husband has a woman friend, and if you're not jealous of that person, then that shows you don't really care about them. So they think being jealous reflects a kind of love, but actually it's not. It's the opposite. It reflects the kind of insecurity and self-downing, not love. Mick?
yeah, well, when you say attractiveness is in the eye of the beholder, I disagree with that because healthy attractiveness is something that we want to cultivate. And if somebody finds jealousy attractive, I would contend that they have some very self defeating habits that they would do well to get rid of. So just because you find jealousy attractive doesn't mean that it's a good thing or something to look for in somebody else. Because I would bet dollars to donuts that eventually that mindset would come back to make your life difficult.
Yes, often it does. Often it does. But as we know, humans are very imperfect. They don't always think rationally. So uh, thinking irrationally uh, with some people thinks that if jealousy means that someone really cares about you. Mick?
I was going to say, though, in this podcast and with REBT, we accept that people are irrational and fallible, but we encourage people to be rational and to be functional in their lives. So I do not advocate being attracted to jealousy. And if somebody does find jealousy attractive, I would advocate that they look at why they think it's attract, why they find it attractive. And I think that there are going to be some demands underneath that idea.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And what are some of those demands?
Demands under jealousy, well, I think you might have mentioned them, but I must always be attracted, I must always be attractive to somebody. Or I think really, when it comes from a practical standpoint, I I must have this other person never interested in anybody else or never find anybody else attractive in order to have a stable relationship. And that's absolutely not true. As long as somebody doesn't act on it, you can continue to have a monogamous relationship. And there are little flights of fancy. I've talked to school teachers who've told me that they had crushes on the students that they taught. They weren't ever going to do anything about it, but they found one particular student very cute. And they knew that that was the end of what their appeal, what they were finding appealing was going to become. That was that. So if somebody finds somebody else attractive that isn't their main partner, it doesn't have to threaten the relationship in the least bit.
Yeah, and even if uh, even if the person does act uh, on their interest in a third party, that doesn't necessarily threaten the relationship. There are monogamous relationships, and also there are non-monogamous relationships which are successful. Now, that's not easy for people to pull off because they're irrational and they tend to get themselves jealous, but some people do. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, I agree. That's not easy to pull off. And the common practice is monogamy. So that's generally what people think of in relationships. But you're right, there are people who have non monogamous relationships. And I know people who claim they have successful monogamous relationships for decades. So who am I to say that they don't?
And also, if you think of having friends, normally, if you have a good friend, your other friends aren't going to feel jealous because they think that the other friends are going to steal you away from their main friend. And that could be the same with love sex partners. It's not necessarily mean that you're going to lose your primary relationship because you're having other relationships. Yep.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think another component in jealousy is somebody rating themselves or rating the other person. Oh, I am less of a person because this person is not enamored with me 24 hours a day. Whereas if you can just say, well, I'm acceptable no matter what their interest may or may not be, then you can eliminate the idea that I have to have them interested in me 100% of the time or entirely enamored with me all the way 100% of the time. When we've got a demand, there often is a rating of ourselves or other people or the world behind it. I must succeed, or the world is no good, or I am no good, or I must have this person's love, or I am no good, or the world is no good. And we are always acceptable, and life is always acceptable, and other people are always acceptable too. it's a hell of a lot easier to live without jealousy. It's placing demands. Would you say, Michael, when there's jealousy, there is a demand?
Yes, jealousy comes from a demand, as we've been saying. I must be number one in this person's eyes all the time, 101%,
Yeah.
past, present, and future. When I started seeing Albert Ellis as my therapist when I was 18, I had a jealousy problem. And I learned from him that jealousy was irrational, self defeating. It didn't make sense. So I had, in order to practice that and implement this new way of thinking without my must, I encouraged the girlfriend I had at the time to see other people. And with the reciprocal agreement that I could also. And she immediately went out and had a date. And I got very jealous. I made myself very jealous. But that was a great opportunity, a golden opportunity to work on my jealousy. And I've pretty much overcome my jealousy. Yeah.
And I was just going to say, as I was mentioning before, I must have this person's emotional um, passion towards me under it's we could take the approach, okay, I don't have to have it, I absolutely don't have to have it, nothing in the universe says I have to have it. But if I address I am acceptable whether or not I have it, then I'm getting at one of the reasons why I'm convincing myself why I have to have it, that I can't accept myself, I'm not acceptable if I don't have to have it. And so if I acquire and cultivate the ability to accept myself, then it's much easier not to be jealous and to let go of the belief that I have to have their intense passion directed towards me.
Yeah. And also, as we like to caution in these podcasts, when we talk about some basic irrationality, if you do have that irrationality, if you do make yourself jealous, don't put yourself down or think you're a horrible person or an emotional basket case because you make yourself jealous, but go for acceptance, accepting yourself as the imperfect human you are who easily makes themselves jealous. Yeah.
And also, I could say I am imperfect. I have a tendency towards jealousy. However, I want to overcome that. And I can look at the behavior, look at the thinking, look at the self defeating habits and say, I'm not a bad person because of this. I can work to overcome it. And so, not just settling for, well, okay, I'm fallible and I'm always going to be fallible. How can I overcome my tendency towards this fallibility, this
Yeah.
specific fallibility?
Yeah, yeah. So don't, as you're saying, Mick, don't go to the other extreme and say, well, it doesn't matter. I'm helpless and hopeless, but work toward, once you accept the fact that you have this problem, then work hard, practice, 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 identifying the musts in there and questioning, challenging, and uprooting your musts. Yeah, Mick?
Right. And just to take that further, we do recognize in REBT we're all fallible human beings, but we are also capable of being successful human beings and quite adept and skilled. So we accept that we're fallible. We'll probably never be infallible, but what can we do to become better at the things over which we are fallible?
Yeah, yeah. Okay, anything else on jealousy you wanted to say? I'm sure
Um,
I finished.
yeah, I'm jealous of how much screen time you took in this podcast.
Ah, well, start
That was a
questioning
joke.
those. What's that?
That was a joke.
Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah. By the way, there is a difference between jealous, jealousy, and envy, and there are different opinions about the difference. But as I see it, you can be uh, you're jealous of another person, but you're envious of something they own. So you could be envious that your neighbor has a Mercedes or a Tesla, but you wouldn't say you're jealous of that. You're envious. But normally, if you're jealous, it's about another person. Nick?
Yeah, and also I've you reminded me of I was watching with a friend and we were watching another friend of mine playing piano, and they said, "Boy, I really envy him." I envy him too. He's a great, great piano player. And within this is the possibility, well, if this is something you envy, why not try to acquire it yourself? It'll be quite hard. This guy's been playing piano for literally 70 years, so I'm not going to become as good as him overnight, maybe never, but it's at least something to aspire to. And envy can be something for us to enrich our lives in, to see if we can acquire whatever it is. If somebody has a Mercedes and I'm envious of their Mercedes, how might I own a Mercedes?
Yeah, right. How can you do better and get what you're envious of? But also, how can you have a passion to earn enough money to get the Mercedes without making yourself envious about it? Mick, did you want to have the last word?
What do you mean without making yourself envious without it? Do you mean jealous?
No, envious. I defined envy a little
Yeah,
before
but
as
if
envious of
somebody,
something a
if,
person owns and jealous of something a person has in a relationship with another person.
right, but if somebody has a Mercedes and I'm aspiring to have enough money to get the Mercedes, isn't maintaining my envy a good thing?
Well, as I said, it depends on how you define envy.
I'm defining it the way you did, that I like what they have. I would like to have what they have. I don't, they're not a better person, but I love that car. It would be a lot of fun to have that car.
Yeah, no, I defined it with the must, with everything you just said, but with the must. Therefore, I must have that car. That's why I'm defining it. So that just proves we could have different definitions of the same word. So
You're,
it's always good
you're
when you speak
defining,
with someone to
you're,
understand how they're defining whatever you have a difference about.
you're defining envy as having a must.
Yes, uh-huh.
I thought you were defining envy as not having a must.
No, no, I'm defining envy as having a must as opposed to having a preference. I would love to have that, own that Mercedes, but uh, I don't have to. That's how I'm defining it. I think you're defining it a little differently, which is fine. So
Yeah,
it's
I'm defining it as an intense desire for,
right.
and it's something I want to pursue. But as we've said, the more you want something, the easier it is to flip it into a demand. And in REBT, we encourage people to retain their desires and even their very passionate, intense desires. Just do the practice so that they don't become demands, or if they do, you can change them back to just desires, even
So
really strong desires.
so you're saying if someone has a must, I must own a Mercedes because my neighbor does. Would you call that jealousy?
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think it's almost moot what we call it. It's not good to think that way, you
Yeah,
know.
exactly. It's not good to think that way. That's the bottom line. And I was
Yeah.
just defining that as envy. So we
Mm.
have different definitions. Mick, did you want to have a last word?
Yeah, one of the things that I like about REBT and that people can really use makes things very clear. Get rid of the demand, keep the desire.
Yeah.
And it takes it's some I've heard people say to Albert Ellis, it's that easy or it's that simple. It's that simple, but it's not easy.
Okay, very good. Very good. Thanks, Mick. Mick Berry, my co-host. And thanks, Chris Rossini, our tech engineer. Comment below if you have thoughts about what we discussed. Give us a thumbs up if you benefit from it. Suggest subjects that you would like us to visit in the future, and volunteer if you'd like to be a guest, and we'll cure you in 30 minutes or less. And subscribe to the 3 Minute Therapy podcast to do what, Mick?
To stay on the rational side of life.
Very good.